Nobody saw it coming when Kash Patel tried to take down Denzel Washington on national television. What seemed like just another tense congressional hearing quickly turned into a moment the nation wouldn't forget. The atmosphere was electric, the kind of silence that settles in just before something explosive happens. Cameras rolled, eyes locked forward. The air felt thick with anticipation. Inside the hearing room, with its polished wood panels and staged political theater aids, lawmakers and journalists filled every seat waiting for sparks to fly. At the heart of the unfolding drama sat two very different men. On one side was Kash Patel, a former Trump aide turned media provocateur, leaning into the microphone with a smirk he didn't bother hiding. Opposite him sat Denzel Washington, calm and steady, projecting quiet strength. He hadn't come to perform. He came to take a stand. Patel leaned forward, cleared his throat like an actor warming up, and then delivered the blow. "Why don't you just go back to the zoo?" The room stopped. Not a single breath. A few aides looked up stunned. A pen hit the floor. One person exhaled like they'd just been gut-punched. Denzel remained still. He didn't blink, didn't react. But Patel wasn't done. With smug confidence, he brushed imaginary lint from his jacket and pressed on. His voice took on a syrupy arrogance as he continued, "Mr. Washington, we're here to discuss serious issues, law, order, national values. So you'll have to excuse me if I'm struggling to understand why a Hollywood actor is sitting before this committee." He tossed out a shrug, more theater than sincerity. "Outside of your dramatic speeches and Twitter rants, maybe you can help me out here. Was your background in makeup and lighting? Or did you specialize in social media branding before deciding to play politics?" The insult wasn't subtle. It was bait and a trap. Patel glanced at the cameras playing to them now. "Some of us earned our stripes through years in national security and legal service. Others woke up famous because they threw a tantrum on TikTok." He paused for a reaction. Nothing, just dead silence. So he pushed harder. "Tell me, Mr. Washington, what matters more to you, defending the Constitution or perfecting your Instagram profile?" It wasn't a question, it was an ambush. A calculated attempt to diminish Denzel into a stereotype, just another celebrity with a microphone and no substance. But Denzel didn't rush to respond. He let the silence stretch, uncomfortable, deliberate. The insult was allowed to breathe, to linger, until no one in the room could pretend they hadn't heard it. Then, without raising his voice or making a single dramatic move, Denzel leaned forward. His tone was firm, measured, and cutting. "Mr. Patel," he said, folding his hands with composure, "I understand your confusion. It's difficult to recognize integrity when you've never had to live by it." Heads began to turn. A low murmur swept through the chamber, not loud but unmistakable. The balance of the room had shifted. Denzel's tone never changed, but the temperature did. "Since you're curious about my background," he continued, steady and direct, "let me fill in what your research conveniently overlooked." He laid it out with clarity. He'd earned degrees in both theater and criminal justice. While Patel had been maneuvering through political appointments and DC galas, Denzel had been walking into courtrooms, sitting with kids facing time for crimes they hadn't committed. He'd consoled families torn apart by policy failures. He'd mentored young men discarded by a justice system that judged their skin long before it ever saw their story. His eyes locked onto Patel, unwavering. "Maybe you built your reputation shaking hands in Washington's back rooms," he said. "I built mine by looking broken men in the eye, the kind no one else would fight for." A quiet ripple moved through the hearing chamber. One lawmaker gave a subtle nod. The momentum was turning. Denzel wasn't finished. "As for social media," he added, "I used mine to educate, to strip away the spin." Which is ironic, since some people in this room seem to have made a career out of spreading it. Patel shifted in his seat, that smirk from earlier gone. Denzel leaned forward only slightly and delivered the next lines with surgical precision. "You questioned my qualifications," he said, his voice smooth and certain. "So let's talk about them. No dramatics, no raised voice, just plain truth delivered like a closing argument." He'd questioned witnesses under oath. He'd studied the law not just in textbooks but in real rooms where decisions meant life or death. He'd helped write legislation. He'd stood in places where no one clapped and cameras were nowhere in sight, only consequences. He paused just long enough. "So let me ask you, Mr. Patel, when was the last time you cross-examined a witness? Not on cable news, but in a real courtroom in front of a judge. When was the last time you stood beside someone whose life depended on justice, not ratings?" The silence in the chamber was no longer awkward. It was focused, intentional. All eyes turned toward Patel. His body language shifted, if only slightly. Denzel didn't let up. If this is all just performance to you, another opportunity to trade insults and sound bites, then maybe you should reread the job description. The room was no longer just an audience. It had become a jury. From somewhere in the gallery, a faint voice whispered, "Damn." It cut through the quiet like a gavel. The moment landed hard. Kash Patel glanced down. He tapped the desk once, then again. He opened his mouth searching for something sharp to fire back, but nothing came out. Denzel calmly folded his hands. "I didn't show up for applause," he said, his voice low. "I came for the truth. If that makes me a target, so be it. I've faced worse. I fought harder. And I'm still here." He let that truth settle in the air, but the silence didn't hold. Patel's pride couldn't stand the weight. The smug grin returned thinner, now forced. He leaned into the microphone again, a trace of bitterness beneath his words. "You know, Mr. Washington," he said with feigned amusement, "it's always amusing when people parade their past around like a badge, like standing next to criminals makes you some kind of hero." He turned slightly toward the spectators, trying to reclaim the crowd. "But hey," he said, "when you've spent your career defending felons, I guess it's hard to understand what the rest of us are trying to protect." Gas echoed softly across the room. Patel wasn't done. "You talk about law and integrity? Fine, let's talk about the people you've chosen to stand up for assault charges, drug trafficking, robbery." He listed them like accusations, not cases. "Are they misunderstood victims too?" Patel sneered, the sarcasm thick. "Or is injustice just easier to cry when it fits your script?" Denzel didn't flinch. His expression barely changed, but his eyes narrowed. He'd seen this move coming long before Patel played it. With a flourish, Patel flipped through a few printed pages and held one high like a courtroom prop. "And then there's your social media," he said, voice rising slightly as he held up a tweet, calling the justice system rigged theater. "That's the same system you're here claiming to respect." He paused, waiting, hoping for hesitation, for a stumble, for a crack in the composure. But Denzel leaned forward, calm, unbothered. His voice was quiet, deliberate. "Let me save you the trouble, Mr. Patel," he said evenly. "Yes, I said the system is rigged, and I stand by it." A subtle tension swept through the room. "I don't say that out of hate for the system," he continued. "I say it because I've seen it from the inside. I've watched one teenager get 15 years for carrying weed, while someone else walks free after laundering millions." He let that truth sink in. That's not justice. That's arithmetic based on who can afford the better lawyer. Patel's eyebrows lifted in feigned shock, but Denzel kept going without pause. "You think that makes me anti-law?" he asked, steady as stone. "I'm not against law. I'm against inequality, against a system that punishes poverty harder than it punishes crime." He leaned in slightly. "If that sounds radical to you, maybe the issue isn't with my values. Maybe it's with yours." This time the whispers from the gallery lasted longer, deeper. The kind that signaled discomfort, not just with what had been said, but with what it revealed. Even a few panel members seemed uneasy now. Denzel turned not to Patel, but to the room, to the people who had been silently watching. "As for those I've stood beside," he said, his voice lower but resolute, "I didn't choose them for image or convenience. I stood with them because no one else would. I defended them because they were human beings, because they had rights, because I took an oath when I didn't trade in for likes, headlines, or a book deal." That line cut sharp, and it was meant to. Across the room, Patel froze. The printed tweet in his hand crumpled slightly as his fingers tensed. His mouth opened to fire back, but nothing came out. The moment had shifted, and Denzel didn't wait. "I don't run from my record," he said. "I wear it. Every case, every courtroom, every person he had stood beside. That's what shaped him. That's what sharpened him. That's what made him a real threat to the systems that depended on silence." He turned his gaze back to Patel, calm but direct. "So if your strategy is to shame people for doing the hard work of justice, maybe you're not here to protect democracy," he said. "Maybe you're here to distract from it." This time the ripple in the room was audible. Nods replaced glances. Murmurs turned to murmured agreements. Aides scribbled notes faster now. Something had changed, and Denzel. He didn't chase the moment. He folded his hands. His voice dropped steady and measured, but every word hit its mark. "I've been underestimated my whole life," Denzel said, voice steady, "because I'm a black man, because I came from a working-class family, because I speak plainly even when the truth makes people uncomfortable." He looked around the room, unflinching. "But what you fail to understand," he said, locking eyes with Patel, is that everything you've tried to weaponize against me, my background, my voice, my fight is exactly what qualifies me to sit in this chair. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was electric, like the room itself had stopped breathing. And then in a desperate play to take back control, Patel made his move a calculated gamble. He leaned forward, voice cool laced with academic condescension. "Well," Patel said with a thin smile, "since you've cast yourself as a champion of justice and legal nuance, why don't you walk us through the implications of Marbury v. Madison in the context of modern executive overreach?" He paused, letting the weight of the question hang. "Or is that a little beyond your expertise?" A few eyebrows lifted in the crowd. Classic academic ambush: drop a dense loaded question and hope for a stumble. Hope for silence. Hope the other man chokes under pressure. Patel crossed his arms, already savoring what he thought was a win, but Denzel didn't even blink. He leaned back, casual, calm, almost amused, and then came the slow, quiet smile. Not smug, not theatrical, just confident.